What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Good Wolf Project. I'm your host, Jerry Scarlato, and today's conversation is with Brenden Kumarasamy. Brenden is a communication coach, and you can see his communication skills throughout this interview. We talk about things very deep in communication and some things outside of communication. We talk about how to talk to people that you don't agree with, how you can better understand your friends and family, how you can have deeper conversations, how you can get away from shallow thinking and shallow conversations, and so much more. Make sure you get your pen and paper out. Also, make sure you hit the pause button real quick so you can go rate and review the podcast. The more reviews we have, the more we get to spread the message. So I would greatly appreciate if you do that. Make sure that you enjoy this conversation with Brenden Kumarasamy. Brenden, good to see you today. We were talking a little bit about your shirt. What is Charity Water?
Yeah, for sure, Jerry. So Charity Water is a nonprofit, and the goal of the
Yeah.
nonprofit is to help the world gain access to clean water. And I read the founder's book with Scott Harrison in
What's the name of the book?
2018. Oh, sorry, what did you say?
The name of the book?
It's called Thirst.
Thirst? Okay.
Yeah, thirst, like
Mm,
thirsty. And I
mm.
read the book, and I was really inspired by his journey. So ever since I started working my corporate job, my first corporate job was in 2019. Every month I always donate a little bit of money every month. But that's not why I'm wearing the shirt. The reason why I'm wearing the shirt, as I was telling you before,
Yeah.
is because the fit is just really nice. So I just put this on every time I'm doing a show.
It's just one of those shirts. No, I was curious about the shirt. I'd heard Charity Water, but I didn't know the background of it. So I think our topic today, what we're going to end up getting into, which is your specialty, communication, is something that the world, especially westernized world, needs a lot right now. So I'm excited to be able to get into the topic with you. But before we get into it, I'm curious how you got into it. I'm curious how you got to communication, because my assumption is you're somewhere between the age of 25 and 30. And if that's the case, then you grew up in an era where communication was not prioritized, or I'll say interpersonal communication was not prioritized. Maybe face-to-face communication is a better way to put it, was not prioritized. So I'm curious how you got into communication. Where does that come from in your life?
For sure, Jerry. So one, your assumption is correct. You got the right age range. So I'm 27 currently, and I'm turning 28 in a month or so. So you're right. Like my generation, at least especially the one after mine, Generation Z, I think, is probably the next one, is definitely not really focused on communication. So how did the world did I get into this field of work? So how the journey started, Jerry, I was 19 years old and I studied in accounting, funny enough, and I have a degree in the subject. I always wanted to be an accountant. That was always my dream because I was really good at numbers and I was terrible at everything else. And I didn't know you could be a communication coach, never really a profession. I never really liked speaking either growing up because I have a disability in my left arm. It's crooked because of an accident I had at birth. And I spoke my whole life in a second language because I live in Montreal. And for those who don't know, Montreal, the first language is actually French. It's not English. So I had to learn the language and I was like making a ton of mistakes in these presentations. But what happened, Jared, was when I was in school, I started doing these things called case competitions. So think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age were like playing football or rugby or baseball or something like cool, probably wouldn't see me doing that. I was doing presentations competitively, but I did it to get a job. And then as I got older, I started coaching the students and I accidentally developed a talent for it.
Nice. So it's kind of like the debate team in high school, right? That kind of thing. But instead, is it different than the debate team? What I hear is you're like doing a presentation, or what I visualize, you do a presentation, and then someone else and does a presentation, comes in, does a presentation, and then they judge the two presentations. You're not necessarily debating each other live, but per se, but you're doing a presentation on the same topic. Is it on the same topic, or is it just like you had a topic, they had a topic?
Yeah, excellent question, Jerry. So I get asked that a lot. So debate, to your point, is like two people. Let's say there's like a really controversial topic, like abortion, right? So one of them has to be pro-abortion, the other one has to be against it, and they like fight each other to the death, and then the winner kind of gets the prize. Case competitions are a little different. So let's start with why do they exist? The reason they exist is the recruitment tool for companies. So I'll give an example. Let's say Walmart was a case sponsor when I was in school. This is a long time ago when I was in college. And what Walmart does is they'll create like a 15-page document of a problem that either was solved by Walmart in the past or that's currently happening right now at the company. So an example could be, to keep this super simple. Let's say me and you are on a case competition team. Walmart comes up to us and says, Jerry, Brenden, I want to open a new Walmart store, but I only have enough money and resources to open it in one of these two locations. Either I open it in Montreal or I open it in New York City in this specific area. Where do you think I should open it and why? And they're give you a bunch of data. This is how much the store costs. Obviously, the one in Montreal is going to be cheaper than the one in New York, but New York might make you more money. So you do all the numbers, you crunch everything, and then you pitch your solution to sometimes the actual executives of the company. So then those people would look at you, and you're like a 20-year-old kid. So you don't know anything about Walmart, but those executives are looking at you and they're going, wow, some of these kids are better than my current executives, and they get job offers. That's how these things work.
Nice. Well, that's pretty cool. That's definitely new to me. Debate team I had heard of, but that's something I'd not heard of. However, it makes perfect sense, from a corporate standpoint to have something like that to be able to get some new talent in the door and be able to develop and so on and so forth. And on your end, I imagine that requires a decent level of research, like the diligence to do the research and everything. Do they give you all the research, or is it something like you have to dig into? Like you have to find the research, you have to find the numbers, you have to find all of that stuff as well?
I love your curiosity around this. Most people never ask me about this. I'm actually
Yeah.
kind of excited to talk about
Mm,
this.
yeah.
So you're right. So how it works is we're nerding out over the case competition. So there's different formats, Jerry. So
Mm,
there's two different types of competitions, the closed case and the open case. So the closed case is you get put into a room, you get 3 hours to open a 20-page document, read the whole thing, come up with the solution, make a bunch of slides, and at the end of that 3 hour mark, you get thrown out and you have to present immediately to the judges. So there's no prep time to prepare. And a closed case means you're not allowed to use internet. So internet gets disabled on all of the laptops. They use like specialty laptops where the Wi-Fi gets blocked so that no
mm,
student can access it. And then there's open cases. So open cases are often at international level competition. So I know this sounds crazy, Jerry, but there are literally business schools across the world who fly out to different countries to compete against other people. Like I coached a team. I have two teams. I coached a team in Bangkok and the other one was in Hong Kong. So they came to Montreal for like a week and I was their buddy for the week because the world's largest case competition actually weirdly hosted at my
mm.
city. It's
No
hosted in
kidding.
Montreal.
That's
Yeah,
funny.
so like 20 countries from around the world come to Montreal. And it's a lot of fun. I got friends in like
Mm.
10, 15 different countries because of that. But the idea is in those competitions, you have 24 hours and it's open case. So you can do whatever you want. You can do a ton of research. And most of the best teams, they don't sleep that 24 hours. They just sit there and just bang away at that computer so they can beat the other teams. It's wild. Yeah, it's pretty intense.
Uh, I'm just envisioning this actually. It's super cool to think about. But no, I'm super curious about it, and I appreciate you digging into it. That it's just something I never heard of, but the level of discipline it requires from you, the person, I can only imagine what that actually instills in you, like the skills and the abilities that it instills in you. It's beyond just communication. It's the problem solving you have to do. It's the ability to sit there and focus on one thing, monotasking for a long period of time, which again, so much society has lost. Like the number of skills and abilities that you developed because of that thing alone, like being involved in that alone, I can only imagine. Speaking of which, what are one or two of the skills that you think of that you're like, I know that this has had a huge impact on my life just because I was involved in this?
Absolutely, Jerry. Well, let me start by saying everything you said there was 100% correct, right? The monofocus, you get a lot more concentrated, you have standards, but I'll give you two key ones. I was kind of like the way I summarize myself in the case competition world, it always gets last from the people in my community, is I'm kind of like the Michael Jordan that nobody gives a shit about. And what I mean by that is I was the Michael Jordan of case competitions. It's just nobody cares about case competitions.
Right,
So
right.
like in the 4 years that I was in college, I trained like 70 people on how to speak, like 50 to 70. I competed in over 50 case competitions myself, which is wild because there's only like 4 years. So every time I found a new case competition, I remember one, it was this weird story. I've never shared on a podcast. It's like there's one competition in Windsor, Ontario. You don't need to know where that is. It's in the middle of nowhere. You have to take like an 8 hour train to get there. And I was so committed because I knew I could win that competition. We paid the entry fee, which is $300 per team, because first place was $500. How crazy we were. And we did the math and we were like, if we get first place, we'll make like $200. And we went. But if you get any other place besides first, we would have lost money. And we literally took a train. We went there and we won the competition. That's how
Nice.
crazy.
Nice. That's
Yeah, it
too
was
cool.
nuts. But
No,
to
it's great.
oh,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No,
All
it's your
good.
point, to the point, to yeah, what we're getting to.
Absolutely. For sure, Jerry. And then to build on your question, what are the two key? There's so many lessons. I'm super grateful, but there's two big ones. One is having a high standard of excellence. So most of the judges and the coaches, so the people who are coaching me when I was younger, are executives of companies. So these people were in the program 10 years ago, but as you can imagine, these are the most talented students in the faculty. There's maybe like, it's kind of like a professional sports team. There's kind of like 80 people in this program, but there's 8,000 business students. So those kids go on to become vice presidents of companies in like their late 20s, and then they come back and give back to the program, including me. I do that every year myself. And they are ruthless. So obviously I came into that program with a big ego, like most guys in sports do, and then your coach kills that ego real fast,
Mm.
real fast. So that's lesson one. Lesson two is community. The reason I became really, really powerful at speaking to your now you're actually one of the few people who actually get the backstory behind why I became the person I am, is because I coach so many people. If I want to be the best speaker in the group, well, all the best speakers in the whole school are in this program. I got to level up my game. And then so funny enough, which has nothing to do with the general public listening to this, is when I went back into MasterTalk and I started creating content, I was actually too advanced for the general public because I would share things that didn't make sense to people. And they were like, what's a case comp to whatever? So I had to tone down, which is why I never talk about it anymore on podcasts unless somebody's curious to ask the
Mm.
questions. Yeah,
No, 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 that's good. And that's a whole other skill in and of itself, right? Being able to actually communicate, speaking of community, to be able to communicate to a wider audience and to a wider set of people, which potentially we'll get into. But at any rate, uh, that's great. That's super cool. And super interesting that that's something that you were able to go through. But again, I can only imagine the amount of stuff that you've developed because of that. So let's jump into communication. There's two things I want to dig into. The first one is deep versus shallow communication. So I have a theory around why our communication has become so shallow, but I'm curious to hear your theory. And what I mean is deep communication is being able to understand a person and being able and comfortable to ask questions about the person so that you can be more intimate. And intimate, I put it in quotes because maybe a lot of people think of intimate as a romantic thing. No, you can be intimate with a person by just understanding them more deeply. But right now in society, we're over here where we just ask basic level questions and we don't really dig any deeper than that. It's very high level. How's your day? How are things today? Very short answers, very quick answers. Yep, nope, that kind of thing. So, first, I'm curious your thoughts on why are we in this shallow communication area, if you will?
for sure, Jerry. So I'll give you my overall thoughts and then feel free to counter me or disagree. Feel free. I'm very open to either. Is let's start with this. I don't think the generational differences are as big as people think they are, right? That's the first argument I'll make. Here's what I will say. There's two things I'll say. The first one is this idea of optionality. At the end of the day, human beings are intrinsically the same. Whether they live in Africa, whether they live in the US, whether they live in UK, we're all Homo sapiens at the end of the day, and we've all had millions of years of conditioning in our brains. So we're all fundamentally the same. So because of that, there's one key area that a lot of us share, which is the idea of convenience. So if you go back 50 years ago, right? Even if I wasn't around 50, and you probably weren't around 50 years ago too, is 50 years ago, if I have the option now, let's use dating as an example because it's easy to explain, is your option is either go out there and talk to people and make friends and find a date and get married, have children, or be alone the rest of your life. Those are the two options that are available. So naturally, human beings, whether they lived 50 years ago or today or a million years ago, optionality is always the key, is they'll always pick what is most convenient to them. Whereas today, what's happened is it's more of a comment not on a generation, but on the macro piece, which is the tech, is we just have more options. So now it went from A or B to you can either do that, go to a bar, get rejected, get your feelings hurt, which is probably a lot more effective, honestly. We all know this. Or you can swipe apps on Tinder, even if for most of the time that won't work for most guys and most girls, and it causes a lot of problems. But human beings will always pick the easier option. Kind of like why we, and I do this, frankly, even if the restaurant's 10 minutes away or a 5 minute walk away, I'll still do Uber Eats just because I'm lazy, right? Because we'll always pick that option. That's one piece.
Mm,
The other piece is I don't think it's necessarily, though some of what you're saying is true. Like one example I do agree with that I think is very apparent. I don't know how to fix it, unfortunately, is the idea that when Republicans and Democrats used to fight, they would also hang out with their kids at the same parks, right? So like
mm.
they would argue at the Congress, but then they would meet each other's families and have a great time
They'd be
together, and they
friends
would.
afterward. Mm,
Exactly, very well said. And whereas today it's not the case. So that's a very difficult thing to measure against. Whereas the idea of deep versus shallow, I think, is a different area of thought, which is more around there is a certain number of human beings who want to have shallow conversations. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, right? It's
mhm,
just like that's just their preference of how they live life. They want to be, it doesn't sound that well when I say this, but they kind of want to be in the matrix. So they kind of enjoy that. And I talk with a lot of these people. Let's say when I'm in an Uber, not to say all Uber drivers are like that, right? Or else I'm going to get canceled just saying that. But then there's other people. You're a great example of this. I'm a great example of this, who like to go into that dirty middle gray deep conversation where it's not pretty, there's going to be a lot of disagreement, and there's actually like a genuine fun that both of us have, even if there could be some feelings hurt of doing that conversation. So I think it's more of a question of we need to do a better job, and I think today it's a lot easier to find those people and just stick to them versus trying to fix the entire pie.
mm. So I love in the beginning how you start with the understanding that like human beings have millions of years of evolution built into them, and that human beings will always default to the most convenient option. And I completely agree with that. What I see is that, speaking of that convenient option, what I see is that it is the convenient option that gives us a shallow external communication away from the technology as well. Because when you get used to interacting a certain way here, then outside of that, there's a good chance that you're going to carry that forward as well. So I haven't thought about it in the way that you're talking about, that there's some people who are just going to be that way. Like they just have a high level of, their interest is going to be more high level. They'll ask some basic questions, but they don't really want to dig deep down into that, like you said, that murky area. And then there's those people who just are curious for whatever reason. They just have that curiosity, and they want to know a little more, or they want to build that closer connection. So circling the square is definitely tough. The technology thing, I think we're on the same page on. And definitely you know, when I think about like politics is a good example. When I think about politics and how torn apart we are, not only in politics, but just in opinions in general. If you have this opinion, then you're not allowed to communicate with or talk with this person who has this opinion, and so on and so forth. I'm being a little extravagant about that, but nonetheless, we're not able to communicate with each other effectively if we have adverse opinions. And I also believe that a lot of that goes back to the technology thing that we started with, because technology is so convenient, we isolate ourselves more. We keep ourselves in our box more. And the thing in front of us, the technology in front of us, isolates us more as well, because it's going to catch all of your isms and feed them back to you instead of giving you different viewpoints, and therefore being able to think differently and being able to understand that other people have different ideas. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, especially your point around earlier that you made around how the texting then translates to, oh, that's how I operate internally. That's how I should operate externally as well. And that then trickles to other areas of life. So you're spot on with that analysis. I totally agree. Whereas it's this idea that because we've been learned those convenient methods, those things then get extrapolated to the world. But I think the other part that people don't expand on enough is the advantage that we now have in social media. I'll give you a fun example. If you use it correctly, but unfortunately, most of us
Most
do
people
not,
don't.
right?
Mhm.
Right. So two easy examples. One is the conversation we're having right now. We never would have met statistically in entire human lifetimes. There's no way because you probably live somewhere that's not where I am. So like the chance that happens probably.
True words. True words.
Yeah, there you go. So that's one. But then the second piece is the top five, my five best friends in the world. Fun fact is that they all live in a different country. So one of them lives in Brazil, one of them lives in New Zealand, one of them lives in Nashville, Tennessee, in the United States, and and one of them lives in Pittsburgh. So not all of them. So most of them live in different countries, not all of them. But the reason I bring that up is one of my five best friends. Like this is best friend. We're super close. We talk to each other all the time. Actually, men, as you know, we don't talk to as much each other as
It's
women do. But
relative. Yeah.
yeah, relatively speaking. But like we're always, if we need anything, we're always texting. I've been friends with this guy. I'd call him like a brother for like 4 years. I've never met the guy in person once.
Wow.
Once.
Wow.
Yeah, that's crazy. And that's
Mm.
why I have to go to Nashville this year for and then see him. But that's the point is like there's also a strong benefit to social that we don't think about if we leverage it correctly, which has the internet as a whole has enabled us to categorize specific types of people in a way you could never have found them in just a general forum. So if you're a little bit more proactive, you turn off your notifications on social media, you don't let that noise bother you. You make a little bit more effort to go to the salsa class, to go to the running club, just a little bit, not too much, just a little bit, to go to the personal growth conference. That's how I scratch my itch there. Then what happens is you're a having a lot more fun because you're putting yourself in communities that actually have the same interests as you, and it doesn't cost anything. Like you mentioned the gym. I'm sure you have like a gym community around who go to the same gym as you that you have an interaction with. And I just wish that upon everybody is if you just have a little bit more proactiveness, you're gonna have a pretty good life.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to community. That's what you said in the beginning. One of the things that you learned during your time when you were presenting, not debating, um, was
Honestly, there's a
community.
lot of debating till we'd yell at each other
Well,
a
I'm
lot in
I'm
those case
certain of I'm
competition
certain of
rooms. So
that. But community. Yeah, so I owned a fitness studio for 10 years and we built it around community. We called our community the Pack and they were all Pack members. They weren't clients or just people, they were members. And we our purpose was to build a supportive community of like-minded people. So that was the point, to have people there that were like each other, that had like minds and like goals, and that's exactly what happened. So that's when you do that and when you find that, it kind of opens up this other part of you that you didn't know you had. I don't know how to explain it, because when you feel accepted by people instead of judged by people, and we're all going to be judged by people no matter what, even in a community, you're still going to be judged at some level, but at least you feel more accepted because you go, wow, I actually feel like everyone here understands me. And that's because they're going through a lot of the same similar things that you're going through, which is exactly what you're talking about. But that's interesting that you bring that up. So I want to talk, well, how else can we start to then maybe move away from more shallow thinking? How can we start to maybe push ourselves to ask deeper questions? Because I also know that there are some people who maybe they're just used to having those high level conversations, and that's just the way it is because a lot of society is that way. They're just used to being that way. But maybe they want to be able to dig deeper into somebody's psychology or to somebody's life just to know them more. So how do you start to make push those kinds of buttons to know more about people?
yeah, for sure, Jerry. And just a quick comment on your point around why is it that as communities we feel better? I think it's just this idea of human nature, right? Like if you're alone in a living room, you feel the world is against you. But if you're in a community, you feel like your community is against the world. And that's a very different feeling. where it's like when I was in that case competition program that you pointed out very well, is like when I was in that community, we would fight all the time, but I never felt alone in that community because like it was us against the other schools. Sports teams feel that a lot too, whether it's basketball or football or anything, where it's like they have that camaraderie, like that friendship, right?
Mm,
Where it's them against everyone else. And I think that's where it comes from. Is like it gives you purpose, even if it's on a smaller scale, gives you purpose towards something greater. And that's honestly was a complete side tangent. That's why I started MasterTalk. Because when I finished my career as a professional presenter,
mm,
fun fact, kind of like the NBA, you can't really present anymore after you graduate. You're kind of done. You can't do case
mm,
competitions anymore. So I was like, oh, and then I started working at corporate. I got a great job at IBM. Life was going good for me, but I was like, this is boring. Like, I need to do
mm.
something exciting. So I started doing Master Talk. But then the other piece, which is your question around deep thinking, I've thought about this a lot myself about how to train other people to do this better. And here's what I came to terms with. I call them 80-20 questions. So we all know this idea of the 80-20 principle. Like, what are 20% of the actions that give us 80% of the results? So I've kind of thought about that in the question, the idea of deep thinking, which is what are 20% of the questions we can ask ourselves that drive 80% of one's clarity in life? And I'm still spending my life kind of creating these questions, but I'll just give you a few examples. One of those examples is if you had all the money in the world. So if I made you a billionaire tomorrow, how would you spend your time for the rest of your life? Not your money, but your time, because you don't have to work anymore. You don't have to be at the office job anymore. You don't have to. So like now you can just do whatever you want. And then most people don't answer that question well. They say like travel. And I say, cool.
Right.
How long are you going to travel for? Right?
Mm,
And that's really the key. So that's one example. And then the last piece, which is more of a hint that I can give people, is what I do to vet for deep thinkers. So obviously it's easier here. Like the podcast host is obviously always going to be a deep thinker. Or why would they want to interview people? It doesn't make sense. So the other filter is you go up to people and you ask them surface level deep thinking question that could eventually lead to deep thinking conversation. So one example that I do when I'm at a personal development conference, I don't go up to them and say like, what's the saddest moment of your life or something. I'll just go up to them and say like, what's exciting right now in your life? And that usually starts the chain for that type of conversation.
that's good. So, like, instead of how was work today, maybe what's a new project that you started at work today? Or what's something exciting that happened at work today? Or something to that effect. So, instead of just a generic, oh, good, like something you can just answer good to, asking a question that can at least pull some sort of structured sentence out of somebody.
Absolutely. And then another version of that, maybe not at work. Let's say you're at a bar or something, at a party, at like some event, like a running club. You could ask people like, "Hey, what's a dream that nobody asks you about?" Like that you have. And then you just ask them. But it's a very chill. It's not like, "What's your dream?" It's more just like, "Oh, like, you're kind of running. Oh, what's something like you always wanted to do that nobody that you never tell anybody about." And then you start there.
Well, it's interesting that you would ask it that way, and that's a great question, by the way, because I think we answer questions better sometimes when they're not directly at us. Meaning, if you can ask somebody like hypothetically, if XYZ happened, then what would you do? Instead of it could be the same exact example that's happening in their life, but just like a little twist to it, and they'll answer it better if you put a hypothetical around it instead of here's what's going on in your life. How do you fix it? And you translate that to, hey, let's say your friend did XYZ. How would you fix it? It's amazing how we, what's the saying? Like, we'll give our friends better advice than we follow through with on ourselves. And it's the same kind of idea. We can answer a question better if it's not directed straight at us, even if it is about our specific circumstance.
Totally agree, Jerry. That you're just absolutely right on that. And I've heard that about that study too, because it's like my coach asked me this question too. It's like if you were coaching somebody else on this problem, what advice would you give them? And I go, oh well, I do A B C D E F G, and they're like, perfect. Why aren't you doing A B C D E F G? And I was like, all right.
You go,
Yeah.
okay, okay, I get your point. No, that's good. And I think that's a good way to think about things sometimes as well. If you don't make it so personal. So if like you're stuck in a problem and you're trying to figure something out and you just go, okay, if I were my friend Sally, what would Sally do to try and fix this? And you don't make it so personal because we just beat ourselves up about those kinds of things. Oh, I'm so stupid. I can't figure this out. Oh, I'm just so dumb. I can't. And you just get frustrated with yourself. And instead, if you can like detach and just go, okay, well, what if I were Tom? If Tom were trying to figure this out, what would Tom do? And that is also a good way to kind of like, to kind of be able to sift through that nonsense that we give ourselves.
Absolutely. I totally agree, Jared. And then the last part to that is just a filtering. So then what happens is when you have these deep question indicators, I'll just call them, I'll just riff something there and I'll make it better next time. Right? These deep question indicators, you ask these questions to people and then you see kind of how they're feeling. So you can get a whiff of them. So if they answer with, "Oh, I'm not really sure. I haven't had that much time to think about it. I guess I would do X." Then it's like, okay, cool. And then you just have a 5 minute conversation, you move on. But then there's other people where like they'll give you'll give them the same question. They'll go like, you know what, Jerry, I don't know the answer, but let me figure it out right now because I really want to answer this question. And you could tell like they're sitting there. Like today, this is happening right now. You asked me a lot of really intrinsically detailed questions. They're very nuanced. So I can't go into my usual script for this podcast. I can't go like, okay, these are the three tips. These are because but you're really like going, this is what's on my mind, Brent. How do you go here? But you can notice like there's a little bit of pain in my face, but it's like excitement. It's like, look, let me like think this through as I'm talking. But you can tell like I'm enjoying it. It's not like, oh my God, I am screwed today. Like I am finished. Jerry's gonna really expose me and I'm done. Right? So that's the idea. So that helps you filter out the right people. And this is the mistake people make, Jerry, is once you find them, stick to them like hot glue. Like I'll give you like a very practical example. So my friend Dio, who's one of my top 5 best friends, haven't seen the guy in 6 years, but we have a quarterly call every 3 months, and it lasts 6 hours. Right? It's like a long call, like to
Jeez,
update each other. Yeah, it's crazy. And then when he came to visit me in Montreal, dude, every weekend I would go to his house and we'd spend 10, 12 hours together. We did that for 3 months and he just left. So yeah, you got to commit to the right people. That's the key.
that's super cool. Um, Yeah, no, that's cool. 6 hours. I'm just trying to wrap my head around. I can totally understand that if you only talk to you talk to one of your best friends once a quarter. I mean, I can only imagine the amount of catching up you got to do in that time. But all right, I think we could riff on this back and forth for a long time. So let's go to the second topic that I want to hit on, which I talked about a little bit in the beginning. Talking to your adversaries, if you will, and we talked about politics and how in politics right now it seems like no one can respectfully communicate to each other. And it's not like on the political floor, it's not like you have to be, I'm not talking about that per se, but just being able to respectfully have a conversation with somebody who you don't agree with, who doesn't have the same opinion as you, instead of being irrational about it. That has trickled into society. It's definitely trickled into American society. I don't know how it is in Canada, but in American society, it's just like the ability to have a conversation and to take time to understand a person who has the opposite view of you. It, that gap is like it's very small. It takes a snap of a finger in order for somebody to shut down the conversation. So, where do you begin with somebody who's struggling with that? How do you take somebody who has a fixed mindset around having conversations with people who have opposing views and start to shift their mindset a little bit?
Very difficult to do, Jerry. And even if 50 years ago it was easier, well, let's not paint the picture incorrectly. Like 100 years ago, there was a civil war in the U.S., right? So it's not like we all had this figured out 100 years ago, and now all of a sudden things are going right. So it's this idea that human beings, some especially, will always be confrontational in nature, right? It's actually against. This is what I argue all the time. Is it's actually against our own biology to disagree with other people. I'll tell you why. Because, and I'm not going to say something complicated in science, it's more just common sense. which is our brain is wired for survival, right? Not happiness. And what is the best way to survive? The best way to survive, frankly, is to comply with the group's norms and beliefs of the tribe that you're already in. So if you grew up a Republican, Jerry, chances are, I mean, not you, but you get what I mean, that you would grow up to be a Republican. Not because you did the once again, not because we did the homework. I'll use we because it's better. Not because we did the homework to actually figure out what those beliefs are, but because the best way to live is to survive, and the best way to survive is to just believe what everyone else
Follow
around us
along.
believes. Correct. So I don't blame people. Like to be like there's a great quote that I'm totally gonna butcher by Alain de Botton, and I don't like to be too philosophical, but you're putting me in that direction. So I was like, fine, let's go for it. Is this idea that loneliness is a tax you need to pay as an atonement for the complexity of one's mind. So as you become more
Mm.
complex and you start to become more of a thinker, naturally what happens is you start to get a little lonely because you start to think in ways, in deeper ways, in unique ways that most people are not willing to do. So you're having trouble holding up conversation with the people in the world in general at large. So you start to feel lonely, and then naturally, what most human beings do is they kind of stop and then they kind of go back. So I don't blame them. That's where that comes from, in my view. The second part is if you dare to transcend and you wanna have those deeper conversations, there's a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. The first one is an acknowledgement that even if society or marketing or advertising tries to convince us that we're all very different from each other, the truth of the matter is, the MAGA Republican Trump supporter and the Joe Biden super supporter on the left is probably going to McDonald's on a Thursday evening. They're probably eating the same food. They're probably all watching Dune 2. They're probably all checking out the same movies. And they're probably complaining about the same things too outside of politics. So I think one is an acknowledgement that all of us are fundamentally the same. Number two is to start by acknowledging what do we agree with, and both of us did that on this podcast, where you'll notice whenever I talk, and you did this too, I always start with what I agree with. So I was go like, oh, these are the points, you nailed those points, boom boom boom. I'm always overly nice when I'm being something the first time, but then if like I know them like then I don't
You'll
compliment
dig
as
in.
much. Yeah, because my public image is at stake on these podcasts, right? So you never know, but you start, but I know you can take it, but just based on this conversation so far. So I start with what you agree with, and then it just reminds both parties there's like a relaxant. It's like, and this also works really well like in families and relationships where it's like it's just a reminder that hey, it's not like me against you. It's like it's us against the problem, right? So that's number three, and number two, excuse me, and then number three is more like a Brendanism. That's what I call these things, where it's more like I heard this quote once. It's not from me, and I thought it was really fascinating. It's just most people aren't willing to accept what I'm about to say, Jerry, which is in many cases, right? In many cases, a sharp enemy is always more useful than an ignorant friend, right? A sharp enemy is always more
Explain.
useful. Yeah, so what I mean by that, it's not my quote, it's by somebody else. I think it's like Jean-Paul Sartre or something like that. It's this idea that an enemy is a strong label. So I would even consider them enemies. I'm just using the quote to describe what I'm talking about, which is the idea is like if you have an ignorant friend, they're always going to go to the parties with you. They're always going to agree with you, nod their head, but they won't really get you or challenge you to think a bigger game. Whereas all of my friends on the other side, even if they're friends of mine, they are not afraid to tell me the truth, right? They are the chosen enemy, the sharp enemy, the smart enemy, the one that you respect, that you grow to respect, that is kind of going, Brenden, I don't like what you're doing on social media. I don't agree with this. And nine times out of ten, they're wrong. But at least I believe they're wrong. But but the one time they're right, Jerry, that time the right is really right. I'll give you a fun one. And a lot of people are gonna hate me for saying this. I remember when I was younger, I was in my early 20s. Me and Dio, how we met is like he was helping me try to get a job. So I'd come to his house every 2 weeks and he'd help me prep for interviews. And then one day he asked me this very controversial question that drives a lot of controversy in society in general. And he's like, "Hey Brenden, if you ever got married, would you get a prenup?" And I was like, and I come from a very like conservative Indian Sri Lankan family. So it's like prenups, you never do that. So I was like, never, I would never do that in a million years. It creates distrust. And he listened to me for like 30 minutes and he was like, "Are you sure though?" Because like a lot of the people you want to be, like you want to be that multimillionaire guy, you want to be that Jeff Bezos guy. A lot of them got divorced and lost a lot of money. what's the harm of signing a few pieces of paper? It costs a few $100, and if the person doesn't want to sign it, they probably didn't love you in the first place, right? And I was like, no, 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 you're wrong. And we yelled at each other all night. And then the morning, I just woke up and I was like, I think Dio might have saved me a lot of money. Hopefully, I
Yeah.
don't get divorced, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
Anyways, bad example, but hopefully that shines some light. Over back to
No,
you.
that is a perfect example. I love that. And he makes some valid points, by the way. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
No, but so what I hear is, again, you don't have to look at the other person as an enemy per se. It's who's the person that's going to push back on you? Who's the person that's going to nudge at you? No matter if they actually believe what they're trying to nudge the opposite of, meaning they could think the same way you think and have the same beliefs that you have, but if they feel like you're being too on one side, they might go, well, what about this? What about this idea over here? If they're willing to at least nudge you away from your overthinking, if you will, or if you're way too far on right or left of any area, of any topic, not just politics, if they're willing to nudge you, that's that. The way that I think about that is in weightlifting, you're not going to make any progress if you go in and lift the same exact weight always all the time. What forces you to make progress is the thing that pushes back on you, literally pushes back on you. You have to put effort into making it move. That's how you make progress. That's how you get stronger. That's how you get bigger muscles. You have to find that sharp enemy, if you will, in the weight, and it has to strain you enough to be challenging enough to help you grow. In this instance, you have to find that person who is, I don't want to say heavier because then that sounds like I'm talking about him being fat, but they have more
Muscle mass.
willpower, muscle, muscle mass to push back on you, but they're willing to push back on you to challenge you in such a way that you think about the things that you're doing instead of just blindly do them.
Well said, Jerry. And then the only little piece I'll add is the problem with our society is that person is being currently labeled as the enemy. And that is where the problems start. And that's why, like, even if somebody says just one little thing, just something simple here, are you voting for Trump or Biden? If you're just on the other side of the equation, conversation just ends, right? And that is not really a place we want to be because there's obviously super intelligent people on both sides. And frankly, and I'm just talking about politics, but it's really applies for everything. And both parties probably want the same thing, a better future for America, a better future for whatever they're trying to do, a better family, right? If that's what your significant other, or a better friendship. And I think if we start, and that's internal work we all need to do as ourselves, is like this idea of like how do we remove this label of enemy and really see those people are as not enemies but really just as sharp people who just completely think differently. Like Dio's his brain is wired for pessimism. So like every time he'll say, and he knows that, so it's not like, and he runs a very successful business. So he's not like too pessimistic where it's bad. Well, he's always poking holes. So I'm like talking about of like a movie idea I'm working on like in 15 years. And he's like, yeah, but there's a lot of inconsistencies. And I was like, bro, I don't care. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, I won't, like, we can't be too realistic. Like, this is not a soap opera. But you get what I mean. It's like, so these challenges to most human beings, it's threatening. It's like, oh my God, this person's the enemy. Whereas if you always take a step back and go, oh no, this guy's on my side, and it takes work and you always have to do it, then I think you'll be in a very good spot in life in general, where you'll always find the truth.
Well, and I think you hit on another point that you just reminded me of when we were talking, when you talked about politics and opposite side. So, like, generally speaking, like everyone has there, you can always find some commonality in there. You can
Yeah.
always find something that you're both after. If you went to someone who's a liberal and someone who's a conservative, and you said, "What do you want out of this? What are the things that you want?" Like democracy is the thing right now in America. Well, we just want more democracy. Both sides are literally saying the same exact thing. The right is against democracy. The left is against democracy. Okay, like so clearly that's what we want. And if that's what we want, then the question is just how do we agree to get there? So you have to find the commonalities to be able to at least start with some level of, okay, we are the same. 99.9% of human beings and our beliefs are pretty much the same. It's the 0.1% that makes us different.
Totally. Absolute, Jerry. And that's really the key, right? Is when we acknowledge those differences, not as positions of from the enemy perspective, but more as allies. And you really start to see the people who have opposing views as allies, you'll get better. And the only way to work on this in practical ways is to steel man. And steel manning, for those who are listening to podcasts, just means you argue the opposite point of view. So if you're fundamentally against abortion, argue why abortion should exist. If you're very pro abortion, then argue the other side. Even if you're like fundamentally in disagreement, at least make the effort to understand the point of view and be able to communicate it. And this is where the pros come in. If you can communicate an opposing point of view as succinctly as the guy on the other side of the aisle or the gal on the other side of the aisle, that means you're a deep thinker. Because it means like I understand the other person's position and I can articulate just as well as they can, but I still disagree because of X. And that's perfectly healthy and perfectly normal. But what's not healthy, but unfortunately most people do, is like they just vehemently disagree with the other position. But if I asked you to summarize their position, you wouldn't be able to do this. And once again, I'm not asking people to do this with everything. I'm only asking people to do this in the context of the things they actually care about. Where it's like, okay, for a specific thing in business. Like for me, a lot of these conversations in my life around business. Where should we do our next lead strike? Should I do more podcasts? Should I be more on LinkedIn? Should I do on Instagram? So it's like I'll steel man both of those positions. So you never have to start with something super controversial. I don't know why I keep bringing up abortion or like the death penalty. Start with something easy, like should we go to Italy this week or on vacation this year, or should we go to London? Okay, just steel man that position. What does your wife think? What does your husband think? What does your girlfriend think? Whatever. And if you can just do that, I think you're practicing the right muscle, which will then make you a very strong thinker over time.
Yeah, the way that I like to think about that is if you can't argue the opposite side better or the same, if you can't argue and understand the opposite side better than your own side, then you don't understand your own side good enough. You don't understand your own side good enough because if you can't articulate why you believe what you believe, part of that has to be in understanding what the other side thinks. It has to be, because otherwise that means you don't even know what the other side means. You may completely agree with the other side, but if all you're doing is disagreeing for the sake of doing it, then it has no, there's no rationality to it. So I think this sub would go back and forth on again just for a long time. So we'll go ahead and go to the normal routine of the podcast. What are three things that people can do? No, I'm just kidding.
No, but to build on that, like to hit the bullseye on what's my perspective, and I'd love yours as well on this, Jerry. Like you're so funny. It's like what do we actually do now? So here's my advice, and people won't like it, which is we can't fix people who aren't deep thinkers. The only thing you can fix is how many of the people you hang out with are deep thinkers. So this is what I don't like hearing when a client or even a friend tells me this. Brenden, I was talking to my friend the other day and I tried to convince him of this point of view and he didn't want to hear me. He didn't want to do it. And I was cool. And I challenged him on this and I go, great. Because I'm very ruthless with my friends, the people I'm close to. I'm a lot more easygoing on podcasts and privately. Yeah, I'm a menace. Probably get canceled. And I just asked them, cool, how much time did you spend in that conversation trying to convince them? They say, oh, 3 hours. And I go, great. How could you have spent those 3 hours better this week? And then he's like, what do you mean, Brendan? And I go, the problem isn't them. The problem is you. Why are you trying to enter a conversation with somebody who doesn't want to be a deep thinker? Your problem is that you need to get rid of those people or limit your conversation with them. So that way you don't like if you asked me, hey, how many times have you argued with somebody? I wouldn't even understand the question. I was like, what do you mean? Like my mom and I get along just fine. My mother, I seriously, Jared, I've never argued with my mom and sister in the last 15 years. And when I mean argument, I mean like where it got like intense.
Hmm.
It's never happened. Yeah, we've had little bickerings around, okay, I need to do this, I need to pick up the laundry, whatever. But like it's never been, and that's also true with my closest friends because they're all deep think because I self-selected them, right? And
Mm.
that's really all we can control. And unfortunately, a lot of deep thinkers who are listening to this podcast probably are not doing that with their circles, and that's costing them a lot of energy that they're wasting on other people, and they shouldn't.
Well, because we feel like we need to accept everybody and we feel like we have to be people pleasers. I'm a people pleaser in a lot of ways, but one way I'm not a people pleaser is by just accepting who's around me because I'm very specific about who I want to be around with. I cannot, to your point, like to sit and talk to somebody about the weather or the news or what the newest celebrity gossip is. I can't do it. I started training. I told you I had the fitness studio for 10 years. And so all I did was work out there for 10 years. And all we had on all the time was Spotify. So it was just music constantly playing. Never heard any radio, no normal media, if you will. Well, now I go to a conventional gym and they play the radio. And so I hear all the jammer that's going on in the radio. And I'm hearing them talking. I'm like, I can't listen to this. I feel dumber listening to what they're saying because it's just a bunch of nonsense. And I'm like, if this is what society is hearing so often, it's no wonder people are so freaking brainwashed.
Spot on once again. That's why one of my weird tips in life is to invest $400 and buy a noise canceling headset. Like I have one of the best noise canceling headphones like in the like ever, like industry grade, like $500 nice Sony MX4s, like really really good. So that when I'm at the airport, there you go, you got them too. Right? So when I'm at the airport, the couple complaining or people yelling about their flights being delayed, I don't listen to any of that. So I just go, life is a gift. Life is a gift. And it's a gift that keeps on giving. So there you go.
Well, and it's just not worth surrounding yourself with people who, excuse me, who don't feed into your life. And I think that we feel like we have to because again, we got to be people pleasers, and that's the morally right thing to do.
Correct. And that's what people need to understand is if you want to convince your family, your friends to act a certain way, there's only one thing you can do. And that one thing is for you to win big. You gotta
Mhm.
win. Just win. If you win, if you become Dwayne Johnson or whatever, I'm sure Dwayne Johnson's family, I'm sure there's a couple of bad seeds like any other family, but I'm sure that family's pretty aligned. Look at what this guy, and he probably doesn't say anything. He's just being Dwayne Johnson. He's doing his thing. Well, we all have that opportunity. And I'm not asking anyone to be a movie star, obviously, but we all have an opportunity to set an example for our own families and communities. Like I grew up in a super dysfunctional household, alcoholic dad, like crazy stuff. But it's like, well, now I'm the man of the household. So now I get to set a new standard. It's like, okay, well, I haven't been drunk once in my life. I never did drugs. So like when my sister looks at me, she goes, okay, like I'm gonna date a guy who mirrors my role model, who's my brother. Hopefully she should say that. Hopefully. But though I do have some flaws, I'm a workaholic, so that needs to though I probably won't fix that one. And then maybe the next generation, maybe my kids will fix that one in me, but there you go. But that's the idea. Just be the example that people want to be. Like a lot of my cousins are the same way. Like I'm very fortunate in that way. A lot of my cousins actually have growth mindsets, but some of them might have some fixed ones, one or two. But all you got to do is win, be a nice person, and then they go, you know what? I think I got to change, and then they do. And if they don't, that's okay too.
Brendan, dude, I think we could jump back and forth just all day long. We're gonna have to get back on and do this again because I think we could dig a lot deeper. We could ask some more intense questions and really find that side that we can get you canceled on,
Hey
get you
man,
in
I'm
some
very
trouble.
open book, so there you go.
No, so I appreciate your time. I appreciate all your knowledge and wisdom. Where do people find you?
For sure, Jared. This is a great show. Thanks for having me on. So, two ways to keep in touch. The easiest way is Instagram. So, just follow me on Instagram, and the handle is Master Your Talk, and your is spelled YOUR. And just send me a DM and say, "Hey, Brenden, I'm a deep thinker too. I listen to this podcast. This is my big takeaway," and I'll respond back with a voice note. The second way is you can come to one of my free trainings. I host a free Zoom call every 2 weeks, and that's rockstarcommunicator.com.
Very good, brother. I appreciate you so much. Thanks for your time. Until next time, my friend.
Of course, thanks, Jared.